Thanks for joining me on episode 349 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
I'm Mario Pareca from 10 Minute Mindset, the podcast. I challenge you to invest in yourself, invest in others, develop your influence, and impact the world by using your time, your talent, and your treasures to live out your calling. Having the right inspiration to set your mindset on the right path is key. And one way to be inspired to do that is to listen to this, the Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my good friend, Scott Mader.
But it's okay if it's not perfect. Instead, often what they're looking for is clarity, that you understand who you are, you understand who you serve, you understand what your message is, and the fact that you understand it so well and so clearly often allows others to suddenly understand how what you do could connect to what they need.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world.
In today's episode about developing your influence through stewarding your talent, I talk with you about why narrowing your focus gives you more impact, not less. I share with you why, paradoxically, narrowing your focus often broadens your reach. And I talk about why you don't have to know everything to do one thing.
You've heard me talk about developing your talent, and one of the best ways to do that is through books. But if you're like most people today, it's hard to find the time to read. And that's why today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Go to inspiredstewardship.com/audible to sign up, and you can get a 30-day free trial. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from, and you can pick one and listen your way to developing your talents via Audible. That's inspiredstewardship.com/audible to get your free trial and listen to great books the same way you're listening to this podcast.
One of the things that happens a lot for folks is you begin over time to always try to expand your skills, to add to your strengths, to add to the things that you can do. And those are all good things. It is good to become better at many different things over time. But the truth is, it's often through narrowing your focus that you begin to increase your impact. If you think about it, the old saying by Alexander Graham Bell is that the sun doesn't burn until it's brought into focus. And oftentimes that happens for us too. It can happen in business, where a business, until it really identifies the very specific people and service that it wants to provide, it ends up being so generic that it doesn't really distinguish itself in any sort of way. It can happen to us as people, where we bounce around from activity to activity, from role to role, from job to job, constantly moving from item to item and never really burrowing down and achieving a great deal of depth in any area. It happens to us in all different facets of our life. Our brains love newness. They love novelty. This is one of the reasons that we constantly chase the shiny object, the new exciting thing, the next thing that we want to be working on, instead of actually paying attention to what's already in front of us. It can lead to men breaking away from their relationships. It can lead to women being distracted by other things. It can lead to any of us going into a set of new activities, when the reality is, if we would stick to the old just a little longer, often we would create more impact, not less. It's narrowing your focus that often allows you to reach people in a way that broadening your focus doesn't. I mean, using me as an example, as I got more focused in my messaging and began to identify that my coaching was going to be faith-based, it was going to be focused on Christian men and Christian couples, I began to achieve more impact. My business began to grow. When I identified in my life that I was going to focus on a few specific family and job roles, I began to increase my impact, not decrease it. And the same thing happens for you. As you identify and narrow your focus, the impact increases. And the irony is usually one of the fears that people have about narrowing their focus is, especially in business, is, well, if I narrow my focus, then I'm not going to have enough customers. I'm not going to serve enough people. And if you're serving or helping others in some other role, the same thing happens. If you narrow your focus, then somehow or another, you can't help enough people. You can't reach other people. But the truth is, what's funny is as you narrow your focus, you often actually broaden your reach. Because here's the strange thing. Often what people are looking for isn't just that your focus actually connects to them and their role. Yes, it needs to have some connection to them, but it's okay if it's not perfect. Instead, often what they're looking for is clarity, that you understand who you are, you understand who you serve, you understand what your message is, and the fact that you understand it so well and so clearly often allows others to suddenly understand how what you do could connect to what they need. And suddenly you find yourself reaching more people instead of less people when you narrowed your focus. It's a paradox, but it's true. I've coached a lot of business owners over the year, and I've seen this happen time after time in business owners. I've coached a lot of men who are struggling with finding their calling over the years. And it's happened time after time then, too. As they've narrowed their focus and gotten more clarity, they've suddenly begun to increase their impact and increase their reach. It has an added benefit as well. One of the things that happens to us when we become generalists, when we try to know it all, is all of a sudden it's overwhelming because there's no possible way you can learn everything about everything. And when you've got all sorts of different interests in different directions, you're constantly bouncing around, and it's hard to identify what is the clear path. What is the next step I should take? What do I need to do today so that a year from now or 6 months from now or 13 years from now, I'm moving the direction that I want to go? It's hard to know that when you have a lot of different directions and when you have lack of clarity around what your focus is. But as you focus in, suddenly you begin to realize you don't have to know everything. You just have to know the next thing. You just have to know what is the one clear next action that you need to take to move yourself along this journey. It's not about knowing everything. It's not about knowing the end of the journey. It's about knowing the next step. That next step is what brings focus and clarity to your action. That next step is what drives you forward. That next step is what increases your impact and increases your reach. Those are the things that you have to focus on. But instead, what we often find ourselves doing is just constantly looking for the next exciting thing, the next shiny thing, the next thing that's bigger and better than the last thing that we did. Instead of sometimes recognizing that doing the small things and doing them consistently with excellence is truly what allows us to impact the world. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you like this episode on the stewardship of talent, you can go over to inspiredstewardship.com/talent and sign up for our 5-week series on the stewardship of talent. Or if you're in the U.S., you can text 44222 talent tips. That's talent tips to 44222 and get those tips. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.